What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Self-Taught Garage, where today we've got another project. What we're going to be doing today is, before I started filming videos, I was given an old tiller for like gardens and whatnot. You'll see it in a second. And anyways, the transmission was messed up. So what I ended up doing was I disassembled the tiller, took apart the transmission, rebuilt it. Had to make new shims because there wasn't really any shims available as far as replacement shims. I took the ones that used to be in there, like the bushings, stuff like that. Bushings is what I meant, not shims. But as far as bushings and everything, they just weren't available. So I replaced some of the plastic bushings with brass. Then the bushings I couldn't find in order to replace that were actually, I guess, made with the housing for the transmission, as far as like the axle bushings and stuff. I couldn't find anything for those anywhere, so I ended up taking some washers that were, I believe, 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch washers. I welded them all together, like a stack of 4 or 5 of them. This has been a while back, so I don't remember exactly, but it was 4 or 5 washers. I welded them solid together, then I drilled them out, because I welded the inside of them as well. And then I drilled them out to the exact size that was needed, polished them up with a little bit of sandpaper, so on and so forth. Then this transmission is grease lubricated. It does not take any oil or anything like that. I saw online that you can put oil in them if you put paper or rubber gaskets in. But I just didn't like the idea. As far as long-term use goes, I didn't want to risk leaking gear oil or anything else. So we just packed it full of grease, which I used high-temp grease. And recently I actually added 2 Zerk fittings yesterday, and I pumped it full of some marine grease as well, just in case, because I used 2 tubes of gasket maker to make seals for it instead of using paper gasket or rubber gasket material, cork gasket, because I would have had to have done self-cut gaskets, because once again, there was no parts or rebuild kits or anything as far as this tiller went online. There was just nothing available. So just used 2 tubes of gasket maker, made the best seal I possibly could. Put it back together, got all those bushings and things made up. Put 2 Zerk fittings on it after I rebuilt it, and pumped about 1.5 tubes of grease into it on top of what I'd already put in it. But the problem we're having now is the main drive gear does not, or I guess the main drive shaft. It's belt driven tiller, so the belt goes to the rear pulley, and the rear pulley obviously is your main drive gear, drive shaft. It runs your main gear on the inside of the transmission. That pulley did not, or that shaft did not have any sort of retainer on the interior of the transmission. So the shaft is actually able to move in and out by roughly 1.5 inches to 2 inches. So what that means is once it is driving and we're actually using it to till, the pulley is vibrating side to side like this, and it's moving in and out. So that gear's losing contact and gaining contact. So it's causing grinding, it's jumping, it's throwing the belts. So I've came up with an idea to fix this, and I wrote it down in our book here. So you can see video doodles. Just to make sure everybody knows, this is my video doodle book. Alright, this isn't to scale or anything. This is just so I could show you all what I have in my head. So this will probably be easier if I turn you around. Hang on. Alright, sorry about that. The dogs escaped. Not 100% sure where we left off, but as you can see, it's going to be a belt guard and a drive gear retainer. So this top piece right here is, obviously it's not to scale, but this is the drive pulley, this is the shaft, and this is just supposed to represent like the transmission housing. So up here we're going to be able to put in 2 bolts on each side of the transmission housing, because the housing is 2 separate pieces that obviously meet in the middle. So we'll be able to get a bolt on each side, and that'll help take any flex out of the mount itself. And this top piece is going to be about 6 inches long, and it's going to be made out of 2-inch angle iron. So we come over here, that's what the cut is supposed to represent. We're just going to have the top piece going down, then right here is where the side gets to come back in. And that is obviously going to be able to hold the belt to make sure the belt cannot jump off of the pulley. Then right here we're going to weld a second piece on that is 5 inches, and we're going to drop that down to a little past the center of this pulley. Then right here, we're going to kind of box the bottom in and we're going to thread it. So that's what this is. That's a threaded hole and a 2-inch faceplate. So at the bottom, it'll be a 3-sided square, roughly. So one side will still be open so we can get the bolt in. And then at that point, we're going to take a bolt, which obviously is going to match the thread for the hole. And we're going to shape the end of it into a little ball. So that way it fits inside this drive gear, because in the center of the gear, there's a small bowl shape, or the drive shaft, I guess the way to put it. The shaft has a little indention in it. Let me see if I got my pen here. Here, we'll just do it with this marker real quick. So let's say this line is the face of the drive shaft there. That's the face. Right in the center of this face, it has literally got a bowl, kind of like that. So that's what we're going to bevel the top of our, I guess, bolt. We're going to shape the end of the bolt to fit inside that bevel. And at that point, we will be able, with the faceplate being threaded, and we are also probably going to tack weld a nut onto it. So that way this bolt is obviously has adjustment, so we can adjust tension or loosen it as needed. And if the bolt begins to wear over time, we can address that. But we are also going to be able to put grease on it. My intentions are, once we get this shaped the way we would like, I'm just going to take a drill bit, put a small indention in it, so that way we can put grease inside the end of it, and that little indention will help hold it. Because obviously metal on metal, there's going to be wear and there's going to be heat, so we want to be able to lubricate it. The downside is I'll have to re-lubricate this every time I use it, but the upside is it's going to fix this transmission housing. It'll hold the belt on and retain this drive gear, so I can still get a couple more years use out of this thing since I rebuilt it. And all in all, I got it for free, and I've probably got 20 bucks invested in this thing. So now that we've got that addressed, I'm going to get y'all set up. I'm going to do a walk around to the tiller just to let you get a look at it, and then we're going to start it into making this thing. Which obviously when I'm making this, I'm going to double check my measurements, double check before I make my cuts, just to be sure that I haven't mismeasured or anything, if I need to make anything longer or shorter, just to play it safe. Because remember, measure twice, cut once. Measure 3 times, cut once. You know, the more you can be sure, the better off you'll be when you're doing this type of thing. So, enough jibber jabbering, let's get to it. Alright, so this is the tiller. As you can tell, I've obviously painted it. It did not look this good when I got it, or I probably would have had to pay for it. But it has a 6.5 horsepower Harbor Freight Predator engine on it, which I'm fine with that. It runs good, it does what it needs to. It's got the treaded tires. It's obviously posi traction. It used to be a limited slip, but when I rebuilt the transmission, I went ahead and made it posi track. And you can see I repainted this part. The only thing I haven't put back on is there's a piece of metal that goes through that little slit right there, and that controls the depth of the tiller, so you can go right across the surface or you can dig down. But what I've came to realize is these guards right here that are adjustable on the side also keep the tiller from digging too deep. So I just said it, you know, it's kind of unnecessary, didn't need it, so I didn't put it back on. So now depth control is all regulated by these little side skirts, so on and so forth. So, like I said, the reason we are doing this is because of this gear right here, and I can show you how bad it is. Let me get this belt taken off, and then I'll show you all how much play is in this. There you go. Can you see that there? I hope the camera does it justice. I mean, it moves a fairly large amount, and that's all just in the gearing. My shims themselves are tight, as you can see. There is very minimal up to down play. I did leave some play so that way the grease that's inside this casing would be able to get in between the shaft and the bushing, just to increase life, because obviously if it ever goes out again, I'm going to have to remake the shim or the bushing. So in order to remake it, I have to cut it off the case and re-weld it on there. So that's not something we want to do more than we have to. So obviously the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to probably pull this tire off, and then we're going to double check our measurements, start drilling some holes and start cutting some metal. Alright, so the way I'm measuring this is, right here is, it goes from straight to an angle, and that's where I'm planning on having the edge of my angle iron. So that's going to be our line right there that we go straight across. And that gives us about a 1/4 inch clearance between the pulley and the belt. So the belt, we will still be able to get it off, but if it tries to jump off, this retainer or the guard or this piece that we're making is going to be able to hold it back on. So 4.5 inches is the exact measurement to get outside of the pulley. So that is right to the outside edge of this large pulley here. So obviously, since we're using 2-inch angle, we're going to want to go another 1.5 inches. Well, it's 4.5, so we're going to go 6 inches. So that's 1.5 inches of clearance for our 2-inch angle. So that'll give us enough room to weld our down piece onto. And at that point, the downside is going straight down, we're not going to be able to hit the center of the shaft. So when we cut this, we're going to have to do a small angle cut, and we're going to have to send it down at an angle roughly like so, the angle of the tape measure here, and that actually is about 6 inches. So just to be sure of the measurement, the first thing we're going to have to do is get this top piece cut here, and then we can move on to our other piece to make sure we get our downside measurement exactly right, or as close to right as we can, because just free measuring it like this without having the other piece to measure too, it's kind of hard to guesstimate what exactly it's going to be. So first things first, we're going to go cut this 2-inch piece angle at 6 inches, and then we're going to get it faced off right here. We got to cut one side off so it'll sit flush on this. We're probably going to go ahead and drill and tap our holes in the top of this housing so we can mount it. So that way we have a measurement for once it is mounted firmly or securely onto the tiller. So that way we get the exact measurement, we know it's right, so on and so forth, and from there we can get our second measurement to be exact, or as close to exact as we can. So I'm probably going to set you all up in a time lapse, and we're just going to fire through this real quick, and then we'll bring you back. If y'all noticed that, but I ended up cutting that first piece on the wrong side. So I just shut off the camera, recut the piece, and now I've let it cool for a minute so that way we can handle it safely. And I cannot find my center punches. So something that I don't know if y'all can do, or y'all know or not, but you probably should. You can take old screwdriver bits, use them as a center punch. As you can tell, this one's fairly worn on the end. If it focuses, it's kind of chewed up. So just take an old Phillips screwdriver, get your hole set where you would like it to be, and obviously smack it. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and get our hole drilled in our cover plate, and from there we will move on to drilling the holes in the casing, and we'll get it tapped so that way we can get our bolts in, and then we can go ahead and start getting our measurements made for our second cut. But first off, let's get this up here and make sure we got our holes punched in the correct place. And we're not going to put these two bolts directly in line with each other. We're going to kind of offset them so that way they handle the load of, I guess, the pressure as far as this pulley wanting to walk in and out. We're going to offset them kind of in a diagonal from here to here across that plane, so that'll help maintain the load to keep this piece from being able to twist backwards or forwards. You could probably get the straight effect if they're in a horizontal line and it would look better, but I'd rather stagger them and play it safe. At least in my mind. In my head, the way I'm looking at it or thinking about it, that's the way I see it working out best. So that's the way I'm going to do it. Alright, so we're going to get this put back up in our little 3-inch vise, which I got it. It's super Chinese. I got it for 20 bucks. And it's literally just to help hold material while I work on things. So, that drill bit I got chucked up in the drill right now is a little too large. So we're going to get our smaller, a little bit smaller stent bit, which by the way, if you haven't ever used one of these, you should invest in them. They are great. Just make sure you get a decent brand. Some of the cheaper ones, such as Harbor Freight bits, they are awful. They dull so fast. So I've got to where I've actually been purchasing them at my local farm supply store, Tractor Supply. And so far, they're not bad. I haven't bought any of their super Chinese ones yet, but the ones that are about $10 to $15, they're pretty good. And you get a set of 3 for that price. So. You can see the bottom side doesn't have that. It's just a sharp hole. So I really like the beveled edge. It helps with getting the bolts in. Just overall aesthetically, it's nice. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to our tiller, and we're going to get these holes marked and drilled as well. So as you can see, this bracket is going to sit roughly like this. So like I said, we're going off right where this angle starts to taper down. So that is what we are going to do. And right here anyways, that belt will not be able to walk off of this pulley on the back side either. So that's another reason we're putting it here. It gives us room to get it on and off, but it will not be able to come off on its own. So before we can drill these holes, we obviously got to mark them. So I'm getting this where I want it for the most part. We're going to mark our bolt holes. I'm going to grab the straight edge here to make sure we got this lined up straight with the orientation of the tiller. If I can find a way to get this straight edge up there. Alright, that's straight right there. And that is where we have our holes marked. So there we have it. Double check our markings. Those are perfect. And now we're going to do the same thing as we did over here. We're just going to punch out the 2 holes. And then we're going to bust out the tap set, get some taps put in it so we can bolt this down quickly and move on to our next step. And as we got those 2 holes started, we're going to go ahead and double check that our plate lines up with them, and it does perfectly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get our tap set, and we're going to check these 2 bolts here to figure out what size and thread pitch they are, so that way we are able to tap them. This is a 1.5 thread pitch, so we need to get, alright, this is an M8 by 1.25. Let's make sure this is the right thread, make sure this is the right tap for our bolt, and it is. So our bolt is an M8 by 1.25. So it's an M8, so it's an 8mm bolt with a 1.25 thread pitch. So now that we know that, we can put the die back in, find our M8 by 1.25 tap. We have that. Now we're going to try to use the smaller tap wrench because personally I just like it better. It's a little bit easier to work with in tighter areas. All right, our holes are just a little bit too small for our tap, so we're gonna step it up one step at a time with this bit until we reach the right hole size. And remember, when you're gonna tap a hole, just take your time. You don't wanna oversize the hole for your tap, so you wanna do a little at a time until your tap fits or starts to grab into your hole as it is right now with me. Make sure you don't lose the arm to your tap wrench. And you want to try to start these as straight as you can. Obviously that's not always the easiest depending on where you're tapping the hole at, but that's obviously where you use your best judgment as to whether or not you should be tapping it. So with these, I'll just try to get it parallel with the angle at the tiller as of right now. And you always try to get it 1 to 2 threads started. And then you just back it off a quarter turn to break the chips. And you always want to run the tap up to about, I always try to go to the center of the tap to make sure I get the threads fully formed. Because the better your threads are formed, the better off you are going to be as far as your threads lasting. They'll have a decent life. So as of right now, I know I'm through because the wrench is turning fairly easy now. But like I said, I try to go to about the center to make sure I get them fully formed. And then I back it back out, as you can see. So now we have an M8 by 1.25 tapped hole right there. So now that we got it tapped, we're going to take our bolt. And as you can see, threads right up, no problem. It's actually a little loose in there for some reason, which I don't see why, considering it's a 18.25 tap and it's an M8 by 1.25 die. It could just be this tap and die set are actually off by a little bit. As far as sizing goes, it is a cheap Chinese set. That's also why you get what you pay for, people. But anyways, it does the job that I'm asking it to do as of right now. We may actually downsize this tap a little. Well, we can't. Never mind. But that is why I brought up the possibility of us welding nuts onto the bottom of this. It's because I obviously didn't know how well this material would thread. Alright, this hole is not wanting to tap. Looks like we have a little burr there at the bottom. So you just want to be careful if that ever happens to you, because you can break these taps off. And where taps are made of a hardened material, it is no fun trying to get them out. So considering there's a burr, I'm only going to go a quarter turn and then a quarter turn back to make sure I keep these chips broken off so I do not risk breaking this tap off in this hole. You just work it back and forth slowly but surely, and in no time at all, burr or not, you will get your tap through the hole. And like I said, I always like to go halfway through, just make sure that I get it good and threaded. You can go till right before you break through the bottom of the hole, and that'll actually make the thread pitch, it'll make the hole grab the bolt, is what I'm trying to say. If you stop just a little before you get the tap all the way through your material, that'll make the bolt cut the last of its thread, and therefore it'll make it actually hold the bolt in very securely compared to your other choices. All right, so there you go, 2 tapped holes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get our piece up there, we're going to get it bolted down. We're not going to tighten it or do it super secure, we're just going to get it tightened down snugly by hand, so that way we can go ahead and get our measurement for our other cut. The thing is, this next cut is where you're actually going to have to angle cut the piece of angle iron. So that's where this is going to get tricky. So since we're going to be doing an angle cut, we're going to have to be very careful to make sure we get the exact angle, and with doing so, it's going to be trickier to get the right measurement. So That's also why we went ahead and cut these pieces of material. So, like I said, we're just going to get it loosely tightened by hand just to help hold it in place. As you can see, it is secure. It's not moving side to side, and that's all we're really truly worried about. We want no forward to back movement. Up to down isn't going to bother us too much, but we want no side to side play. So now that we've got that eliminated, we can go ahead and take our tape measure and measure down to the center of, we can measure down to the center of the shaft to figure out what our next measurement needs to be. So there's two ways that we could honestly do this. One way is we go straight down from this piece of angle to right beside it, and then we cut another piece to jump out sideways to hold this back. So that would be two more cuts, two more pieces of metal. The other option is we just go at an angle just like this, cut a piece that is 7 inches long to the peak, because where it'd be angle cut, this angle iron would be obviously pointed at the end. So that's why I'm calling it the peak. It would be 7 inches to the peak and 6 inches to the end of the angle. So we'd have to start with a 7-inch long cut, and then we would have to angle it from there. And from there, we would be able to drill and tap a hole in the angle iron in order to get it to hold the center of this shaft. So that is what we're going to do. This piece is actually about 1.5 inches past the drive gear of this, so we may even be able to trim this back some, depending on how our piece that we get cut for this comes out. And remember, this is where we're going to weld it together once we get our cuts made. So here, it's going to be welded from here down, but it'll still be removable right here by these two bolts. And then we'll have adjustment as far as tension right here with our other bolt. So, first thing we're going to do, we're going to cut us a 7-inch long piece of angle iron. So that'll take us a little past the end of that shaft. And to play it safe, we're actually going to go 7 1/4. Give ourselves a 1/4 inch to play with in case our measurement's off for any reason. Or if we get the angle cut wrong and have to recut it, we will have a 1/4 inch that we can cut off in the end just to play it safe. So that's a good lesson for you all if you're going to make anything. Always try to give yourself a little bit more than necessary, just in case you do make a mistake and need to cut a little more off to get whatever you're doing just right. And like I said, I'm probably going to set you all up in a time lapse now, because I don't think you're going to care to see all this cutting and stuff. So I'm going to put you all up in a time lapse. We're going to get everything cut to fit. Then I'll bring you back, we'll get it welded up, and we'll start getting the final assembly done. Tread of the tire is catching, so this is what I've came up with. I wanted to kind of round the edges, because I'm just over all these hard angles. They look industrial and I just don't like them. So I'm going to round this off so the tread of the tire can miss it, all while leaving some flat edge on this side for strength. And then once we get it all welded together up here, we're going to do the same to this end, but the other piece is going to be overlapping. So we're going to round them both at the same time once we get them welded together. Got our angle cut, it sits in there flush, and it sits where we need it to sit. So, once again, I'm going to put you back on the time lapse. We're going to start getting all this welded and cut. Then when we get ready to put it together for the last time, I'll bring you all back, and then we're going to go out back for a test, and we're going to try tilling the garden. Here's when we start grinding in the welds and starting to try and get a curve put on this end here. Just like I told you all earlier, sharp edges just don't look great. Splatter makes the arc jump into areas where ideally I wouldn't be going. But all in all, this is what we got. So next thing I'm gonna do is we're gonna take off this tire and we're gonna try to measure where this next hole needs to be for a bolt that is actually gonna hold this pulley in place. So I'm gonna get y'all set up over there and we'll start trying to figure some things out. All right, so as you can see, I got the part bolted on and it's still centered over the hole even though we done the welding. Now, the next thing, which this is the hard one, is trying to get this hole centered up. And from the looks of things, I may be having to add a spacer on this back bolt to get this bracket kicked at the right angle, but it's not bad as of right now. It's not too bad. But one thing I'm gonna do real quick, because I forgot to do this, is I'm gonna take this little piece back off that we made, and I'm gonna take a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch drill bit, and we're gonna clean up the bevel on this shaft real quick. The end of the shaft is beveled. There is a hole there, but it's just chewed up and beat up. So we're gonna hit it with a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch drill bit real quick, just to clean it up a little better. So that way we can mimic that angle with our bolt. Let me try tipping this up again real quick. We've got to try to address that divot, so that's what we're going to do now. I got my bit set. We're going to find the bit that best mimics the existing bevel and go from there. First things first, I'm going to have to knock the, can't remember the name of it, that thing in a little further because I made it myself. So it's just a little too long and I actually tapered it. The little keyway. Alright, there we go. And as you can see, that pulley was definitely moving around there. Alright. Now that we got the keyway knocked in, so nothing's going to catch our drill bit, we're going to get the drill bit put in the drill and just clean this hole up, clean up the edge a little bit. And it's for no reason other than that right there. So once this edge is cleaned up, we are going to stop drilling. And there we go. Alright, so we got that cleaned up. There is a hole that continues on in this. So what we're going to do, since that hole is there, is we're going to take our step bit and we're just going to clean that out and possibly make it just a hair bigger. And the reason we've done that is for reasons I've already told you, because we are going to have to put grease here. And so that hole being cleaned out and a little deeper, it will be able to hold a little more grease. So that way it isn't just metal on metal contact. We will, odds are I'll have to re-grease it possibly every time I use it. But even still, it's better than having this drive gear going nuts and eating itself alive. So right, we're just gonna make that a little bit bigger and right on the next area, if it allows us to. There. And now that is all we're gonna do at the end of this shaft. So what we're going to do is replace our piece and start working on getting our hole marked. Now that we got this set up, I put a little shim in just for the time being. And the shim is to just help align this a little better. And once we get the hole put in, if I need to space it out with a washer or I need to put a shim there permanently, we will. I'm just doing it to help me keep it aligned while I drill the hole. So, the way I'm doing this hole is I'm just going off best judgment, honestly. Have no clue of any other way to do it. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna try to guess center of this shaft, and if we need to move this piece around in order to get it aligned afterwards, that's what we are going to do. The upside is we're gonna be punching very small holes until we get it centered. Until we do hit this shaft dead center. So, as you can see, we're going to use a very small bit instead of that step bit, and we're going to punch very small holes until we get that shaft dead center, and then we'll bore it out to the size of our bolt. And by God, we hit her dead center, so we've got our hole. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get our step bit, and we were going to start upsizing this hole. The reason I know we hit it dead center is because that drill bit shot through and went all the way down the hole that we bored in that shaft. So we know we're in it, or we have the capability and enough movement in this to get it aligned. So with that being said, we're going to start punching it out. All right, and at that point, our step bit bottomed out. So there we are. We're going to take our bigger step bit and we're going to upsize this hole now to, let me grab my bolt set here and I will tell you what size hole we are going to. Probably that right there, because that mimics the bevel that we just put in the shaft fairly well. So, let's get everything put together and I'll bring y'all back. Alright, so we got our hole bored out to the size of this here. I'm not sure what size this is. It is lining up with the bevel in our shaft very well, actually. The only thing we're probably going to have to do is I'm going to add some sort of machine spacer up top here, because we're just a little off on our trajectory, but overall we got it. So, next thing we gotta do is we need to bevel the head of this bolt and get a nut welded onto the back of this piece of angle here, so that way we have something to thread it into. And at that point, we'll be ready for testing. So, I've been showing you all a lot of this process. So I'm going to go ahead and bevel this bolt off camera, get the nut welded on, and then I'll bring you all back. One thing I am going to have to do when I weld the nut onto the back of this bolt, obviously it's a fairly big diameter bolt. The nut is fairly thick, like it's pretty big around and pretty thick. So what we're going to do for the nut is I'm going to get the nut welded on, then I'm going to take the angle grinder and cut it off to just make it a hair thinner. And at that point, that'll be what holds this in place. Once we get it threaded in, we'll take a second nut on the back side and lock it down. See, I got it finished up and assembled. So, next step is, I'm probably going to set you all up out back, and we're going to start testing it out. So, see you in a minute. All right, so as y'all can see, it vibrates like crazy, first off, but little contraption's working pretty good. See the bolts riding in that bevel we made, and it's holding it straight. It's not going nuts, it's not vibrating anymore. So I think this is actually going to work. But like I said, we're going to get down here, put a load on it, test it out, and I'll set you all up so you can watch.